Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy. Welcome back to Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. And in this next segment, we're going to be hearing from Premier John Horgan. And this is going to be from the last few times that we will actually hear from him as Premier of British Columbia. As you know, he is not seeking re-election, and that they are looking for a new leader for the BC NDP. Of course, a lot of reports are leaning towards David Eby taking over, and with that being said, there's going to be a lot of questions asked about what it is that Mr. Horgan thinks is going to change, a lot of things that they thinks that the BC NDP could have done better. And of course, John Horgan, being the diplomatic person that he is stating that, of course, he has done the best job that he can, and that he knows that his time is coming to end as premier. With that being said, he is also traveling to San Francisco, California, to meet with other leaders on the Pacific coast of North America to talk about things that are very important. One of those being climate change. And I'm sure that also, with climate change being on the table, the extreme conditions that have been causing wildfire conditions up and down the Pacific coast of North America, from California all the way up. We have seen a number of extreme wildfire seasons. This particular season, while it hasn't been extreme in the intensity of the other fires, but the season has been extended. Usually the wildfire season is over with for British Columbia at the end of September because rainfall. Well, British Columbia is currently in a drought, and of course John Horgan's not saying a lot about what they're going to talk about, but we would hope that something like that would be on the table and something that they're going to talk about, because we need to understand how to adjust our way of thinking and our ways of life so that we can better assist our planet. So let's listen to the media availability for October 5th for John Horgan as he reopens legislature in Victoria.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you back here as we begin the fall session of the Legislative Assembly. It is a real thrill to see so many of you here in person on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees, and the Esquimalt First Nations. I only have a brief comment at the beginning, which is to say that I will be leaving this afternoon to head to San Francisco, not for the Labor Day weekend show, Vaughn, if you're doing a Jimmy Buffett review, but instead I'm going to be meeting with Gavin Newsom, the Governor of California, Jay Inslee, the Governor of Washington, as well as Kate Brown, Governor of Oregon as we continue the work of the Pacific Coast Collaborative to put in place an MOU on climate action. And I won't tell you more about that because then you'll have nothing to write about tomorrow. So with that, I'll pass it over to Lindsay, and we'll go from there.
Okay. One question, one follow-up. We are only doing room questions today. We'll start with Bender Sargent, CTV.
Hi, Premier. For months now, of course, we've seen a huge increase in the number of glasses, like windows, that have been smashed in downtown Vancouver, and now also the Olympic Cauldron and the Komagata Maru Memorial have been smashed over the last couple of days. So first of all, kind of like your reaction to seeing these kind of treasured monuments being smashed, and also, you know, what can the province do now to stop this senseless vandalism from happening and to punish those who are responsible?
Well, like all British Columbians, I'm horrified when I see bad behavior, vandalism, recklessness with other people's property, and particularly when it comes to those iconic images that belong to all of us. The Olympic Cauldron is an example of that. A monument to the Komagata Maru, very important to recognize and acknowledge that stain on our history, our collective history. But with respect to enforcement, these are largely local law enforcement issues. We continue to work with law enforcement to ensure that they have all of the tools that they need. And I would say to those who believe that vandalism is a way to draw attention to yourself or bring some sort of societal change, you're on the wrong track. People don't want to see that. People react viscerally and negatively to that type of behavior. The good news is that we have the most recent examples, that being the attack on the cauldron at Jack Pool Plaza. We've got these perpetrators on film, and I know law enforcement will be following up on that. And your flashlight's on.
Yes.
You're blinding me with the flashlight.
Am I? Oh my gosh, I didn't even know it was on. You're used to the spotlight, aren't you? Nurses are rallying right now in downtown Vancouver, and of course, as you know, they have a long list of complaints about ER closures, wait lists, workloads, and staffing levels. So, and also safety on the job. So what is your government prepared to do to improve working conditions for nurses?
Well, we are currently entering into negotiations with the BC Nurses Union and a range of other public sector workforces, and that's a good place to have these discussions at the bargaining table in terms of compensation, in terms of the challenges of shortages. But I have said, as you know, repeatedly for many months now, that the human resource strategy, which we've just recently announced, I was hoping would be buttressed by support from Ottawa with a national plan, because the issues that we're experiencing here in British Columbia are duplicated in every other province in the country as well. It's almost a year since the federal government committed to me that we would be working together on addressing these issues, and to have a national strategy means that there's not poaching. Those provinces that have more fiscal capacity, like British Columbia, are in a better position to recruit and retain healthcare workers than smaller provinces that don't have the same fiscal room to do that. That's why the federal government needs to be at the table, so we can have a national plan. But I do know Minister Dix has been working tirelessly. We're creating more spaces for RNs. We're bringing in more care aides, a range of other hires and improvements in recognizing foreign credentials. Those issues are already underway. And of course, at the bargaining table, we'll hear directly from representatives of the BC Nurses Union about where they believe we should go, and that's where those discussions should stay.
Next question, Richard Zussman, Global News.
Do you agree with your Attorney General's assessment yesterday that this chronic offenders problem is something that we cannot arrest ourselves out of? And what do you say to those victims of crime who would like to see those who have perpetrated the crime held responsible for their actions?
Well, I fully agree with the statement you just made, that people who see crime and see perpetrators being not dealt with aggressively, I'm frustrated by that. But I also share the view of the Attorney General, as does the new member from Surrey South, who said virtually the same thing in August. A BC Liberal with a law enforcement background said we can't arrest our way out of this challenge. It's a multifaceted problem, and we're taking a number of initiatives to address it. One off the top was to put in place an all-party committee to review the Police Act, because it's a 50-year-old document, and clearly, and this is, I think, representative of the first question I was asked by your colleague, is that these issues seem to be more pronounced now than ever before. We have more technology, more ability to track and monitor perpetrators than ever before. But law enforcement doesn't necessarily have the tools to address that. And so we need to make changes in that regard. When it comes to the prosecution service, there has been no change in direction to the prosecution service for at least a decade, which would include two different governments, largely constrained by federal precedent, federal court precedents about intrusions and interventions with respect to prosecutions. So for the BC Liberals who followed the same course that we're on, who in fact appointed the current head of the prosecution service, the only thing they could fall back on, I suppose, is that they put more money into it, but that's not true either. We've increased the budgets at prosecution services so that we can get more done in our courtrooms. We put more money into a whole host of other issues with respect to mental health and addictions, as you know. So we're trying to come at this in a multifaceted way, which is exactly what was suggested by the new member for Surrey South.
Follow up?
Is your government considering at all changing the edict towards the prosecution services? You mentioned it's been consistent. I know the federal government finds some of that, but there seemed to be a mention of that yesterday, that could be something your government would consider.
Well, that was recommended by Lepard Butler. The opposite of that. In fact, they highlighted the rationale for not having politicians interfere in law enforcement and prosecutions. And I think that's a precedent that I would want to uphold. But at the same time, I have to be mindful of how the public feels about what they're seeing on their television screens, what they're reading in their newspapers, and what they're actually feeling in their communities. And I'd say to those people who are fearful in their own hometowns that members of the legislature of all parties come from somewhere. We all come from a community, and we're all equally concerned about the well-being of our loved ones and our neighbors. And so we need a concerted effort by all of us to address this. And I was hopeful when we started the Police Act review, all parties, that we would continue to keep this debate at a high level. But unfortunately, we're in a place now where accusations are being made incorrectly by the official opposition, one which was that Mr. Lepard had suggested that we interfere, which he did not. And also taking issue with Minister Rankin's comments, which are absolutely the same, almost word for word, to what a newly elected BC Liberal who has a strong background in public safety. So these are not partisan questions. They shouldn't be partisan questions, and I'm hopeful that we can keep that debate at a high level so the public can have confidence that we're all working on this together, because we're all affected by it.
Katie DeRosa, Vancouver Sun.
Premier, is there any accuracy to the suggestion that both major projects, infrastructure projects, and ministries are given an October deadline to submit their briefing notes to the Premier's office, almost suggesting that your office thinks that the new Premier could be in by October, and then does that mean that there's an effort to disqualify Angela Apperdide?
Well, that's a misrepresentation of what's going on. When elections are called, if they're not on a fixed calendar, immediately the public service begins putting together transition binders in the eventuality of change. The minute that I made my announcement public that I was not going to seek re-election and that I planned to step down, the process of creating these documents started. And to suggest that we have them in early so that they can be reviewed, I think is prudence. And I would expect that most British Columbians would prefer we don't do our homework the night before, but that in fact we're prepared. And that means when we get these documents, we can ensure that we look at them and see if there's any errors or omissions, and that we can do our best to make sure that the incoming government has the best information possible. So I think a bit of a tempest in a teapot, a mountain out of a molehill, a Twitter dome explosion by a bunch of partisans who want to make mischief. And if that gets them off, then great. I'm tumbling rocks and going fishing myself.
Follow up, Katie?
On the, sorry, just sorry. An Angus Reid poll this week said that you're still seeing, popularity around 43%, but the NDP government, 73% of British Columbians said that NDP government is not doing enough on inflation, healthcare, and affordability. And so does that create a problem for the government when you exit, that your popularity is much higher than that of the government's?
Well, I think that that we need to separate the issues out. Personal popularity or confidence in individuals is one thing. I'm equally concerned about inflation, as those who expressed that in a poll. If I had been polled on those issues, I would have probably had the same answers. And I'm the leader of the government. So it's not unusual for people to say there are things in the community that I would like to see improvements on, or I don't believe enough is being done. But the challenge of government is that we have to manage all of those balls at the same time, not just the one that hits the top of the polling charts. Admittedly, the issues around housing are top of mind and number one, and have been for the 5 years that I've had the opportunity to be Premier. And we have been systematically increasing expenditures on more housing, trying to find ways to encourage development in municipalities, and we'll keep doing that. So I don't think, when I see emphasis on issues in public opinion polls, I think that's a good barometer, not just for governments, but for the public, to say, yeah, that's how I felt. Those are the concerns that I have as well. I think that validates people's concerns, and it gives government, I believe, more opportunity to lean into those issues without, if we have to leave one behind or two issues behind as we focus on the ones that are top of mind. I think there's a better understanding of why that happens because of the emphasis in a poll. So I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's an instrument for government and oppositions to better focus the discussions we have in the legislature.
Justine Hunter, Globe Mail.
Premier, you were talking about concerns about provinces poaching healthcare workers from each other and how you'd like to avoid that. I'm wondering if you maybe comment on Alberta is calling, and it's their campaign there. Obviously, they're very keen to do that.
Yeah. That's an outgoing Premier, so we're going to be in a club, he and I, Kenny and Horgan Consulting, I suppose. We joke about that. From the left to the right, everything you need right in one place. But I don't know, that's inconsistent. The Alberta approach is inconsistent with what provinces have been doing for the past 4 or 5 years that I'm aware of. And I'm told by the Council of the Federation staff that there's been a consistent message on healthcare, because it's so profoundly important to all Canadians, that there be a direct focus on that from Ottawa so that we can have a national strategy. For Alberta to encourage people to come and work there, they have a younger workforce, a younger population, and so I don't know why they would need to do that, but they do, and we'll carry on regardless. But I think most people make their choices about where they want to live based on family, based on climate, based on opportunity. And if Jason Kenney calls somebody and says come to Alberta, they might go, they might not. I know that what we need is a national strategy on not just, quite frankly, not just on healthcare, but on how we deal with the human resource shortages in every single sector of the economy.
Follow up, Justine?
Just, at the same time, we don't want to be losing doctors and, oncologists, any of these highly trained health professionals to other provinces. So how do you keep people here? Like, do we need a BC calling campaign? Come for the expensive housing? I don't know.
Well, we are working on a range of items. We were sitting for the first time in my memory, and I've got a good memory, and I've been here a while, sitting down with the doctors of BC to work out how we address the differences between a doctor who's just come from med school and a doctor who's at the end of their career. And we have many 70 and 75 and older physicians who have businesses that they want to protect. That's their investment for the future. And we have doctors who've just graduated who are more concerned about their student loans than they are about the costs of their practice. So it's not like all doctors are the same. And I think why we're making progress is because government is acknowledging that, and doctors are acknowledging that there is a continuum, as there is in all walks of life, between those who are just starting and those that are coming to the end of their careers. So I see progress on that front, and it's the retention is the big challenge, and that involves trying to find creative ways to make that happen. I have someone in my constituency, a former local mayor, not of my persuasion, who has a family foundation, who is working hard across party lines to find ways for municipalities to be a participant in the recruitment and retention component. housing, making sure that there are ways to reduce costs for starting a practice if you want to have a business, if you want to have hire the staff. And others are saying we want the province to hire the staff. We want the province to pay for the infrastructure and manage the records. And we need to find the balance between all of those. But the good news in my mind, and I'm relentlessly optimistic about this, is that if we all bear down and we all find ways to increase our ability to retain people, the recruitment will become that much easier, because it's a welcoming environment, opportunities for young practitioners, whether they be nurses, nurse practitioners, doctors, care aides, technologists, whoever, to come to British Columbia, where they have state-of-the-art facilities, state-of-the-art post-secondary institutions, and a track record of success in delivering those services. I think that we have a lot to offer. I'm not making calls to people like Jason Kenney, but that's his choice. I believe we should, instead of putting up a flag saying come here, we should demonstrate to those who are already here the value of staying, and that word will catch across the country, and if people want to come here, they will. Again, I believe the national government has a pretty pivotal role to play, and they don't seem to acknowledge that.
Alec Lazenby, BC Today.
How does it feel to be in your last session as Premier?
Good. I don't know what to say to that. Good. I love this place, and I love the work, but I also know that everything has a season, and mine is near done, and I'm anxious to get on to other pursuits, but also comfortable that the province is in good hands, not just by the team that I had the good fortune of leading, but also looking at other members of the legislature, the public service. There's going to be change and revitalization at the municipal tables and local governments as well. I believe that people are going to be content and happy with where we're going. There's going to be frustrations, and there will be poll upon poll that will tell you that, and you will ask whoever replaces me these questions. But I'm going to miss it, yeah, a lot. I don't think I'll miss, well, I'll leave it at that.
Do you have a follow-up, Alec?
Any advice for whoever turns out to be your successor to take the job?
Always duck early when you see the brick coming at you. Be kind. Always. I learned that from Dr. Henry. I'd like to think I learned it from my mom, but it was reinforced by Dr. Henry that until you've walked a mile in someone's shoes, you shouldn't be critical of them. And in opposition, your business is to be critical. In government, your business is to be hopeful and focused on finding solutions. And I will not miss the prospect of another minute in opposition, but I will miss the opportunity to make progress for people. That's why all of us, whoever, regardless of our political persuasion, all of us get into this business because we want to make our community stronger and better and help those who need help. And it's not it's not a partisan thing until you arrive here. On election day, everybody's happy when they win, no matter what their stripe is. And if you lose, you maybe try again, or maybe you don't. I'm not trying again.
Les Lane, Times Columnist.
Oh, thanks. Premier, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Prosecution, Peter Juk, issued a lengthy statement 2 weeks ago. It's hard to summarize, but he disputed the whole system, or believed that the criminal justice system is broken. He took issue with the phrase catch and release, and he cited that the crime rate is as low now as it's ever been. And then 2 weeks later, Rapari Butler came out with a report, and there's a bit of a disparity between their approaches. Rapari Butler acknowledged the extreme frustration and the angst and said crime stats don't provide the full picture of what's going on in BC. I just wonder where Mr. Juk's statement came from. What's the origin behind that rather unusual statement? And is everybody in your government on the same page on this issue, whether it's important or not?
Well, I think we are on the same page that it is important, absolutely. Mr. Juk's comments speak for themselves, and I would encourage you to follow up in whatever avenues you can pursue there. What I do know is that we asked Butler and Lepard to look at the issue of repeat offenders, which was not the sole focus of the report that Mr. Juk was referring to. And in terms of raw numbers, I'm sure he's correct. But we had examples in questions earlier today about what I would characterize as crimes that would not emerge as statistics until charges are laid and convictions are realized. So we're seeing and hearing about crime every day, and those aren't manifesting in those numbers. So I believe the public has a genuine and real concern about what's happening in their communities, my community as well, and the communities of the Leader of the Opposition and the Solicitor General and every other member of the legislature. So I don't want to get into a dueling report issue, Les. I think that you're erudite enough to navigate all of that. I would say that this is a genuine concern of the public, and we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to reduce that anxiety by demonstrating that there's been progress. I do take issue with the catch and release thing as well. That's a bumper sticker. Just like doctors, a GP for me, another bumper sticker. The BC Liberals are in the business of slogans. I'd like to think that we've been in the business of trying to solve the problems, and that's not done by a handful of words. That's done by hard work and collaboration, and that's going to be the essence of the government going forward, I'm sure.
Follow-up, Les?
So the prosecution service has pretty much a complete independence from the political sphere. I think most people accept that, but there is a statutory mechanism where politicians can direct the prosecution by issuing that directive that was referred to a couple of days ago. Mm-hmm. Is there any consideration in your government at this present about issuing some kind of directive to the prosecution service to address the perceptions that bill releases the rule rather than the exception? The detention is just not on for most offenders these days.
Well, I don't know if that's actually correct, most offenders these days. So I can't speak to that last bit, but I understand your sentiment, Les. And again, I would say to your readers and to the public that every effort is being made to address these issues. We have invested more in increasing the prosecution service than previous governments. But there has been no directive issued by this government that's inconsistent with that had been delivered by previous governments. That's the federal constraints that we've talked about earlier, and you know well. The challenge I think we have is that we've asked, we started the police work, as I said. We're working on mental health and addictions issues that are also part and parcel of the crime and the senselessness, in my mind, of these wanton attacks randomly at people who are just going about their business. These are largely, they're not criminal in as much as the act is criminal, but the perpetrator clearly has some challenges. This is not normal behavior to do what we've been seeing and you've been reporting so ably. So we need to address all of these issues concurrently. That means more continuing care for those who need it, more housing for those who can't find it, but more importantly, we need to go back to some of the challenges that have been highlighted by the Cullen Commission. And I hadn't thought about going down this road, but you know, to have the opposition, who were in the business of firing healthcare workers, say that we don't have enough when we've hired more than they did in their whole term, to have the same group of people say we're not doing enough on crime when they turned a blind eye to gang activity in the billions of dollars is laughable. And I think the public gets that. They don't want this back and forth stuff between who's right and who's wrong. They want a demonstration of progress. And you do that by collaborating, having urban mayors standing shoulder to shoulder, as we did with the Solicitor General, the Attorney General, and the authors of the report last week, I think demonstrates that to the public that effective, capable people are working on this. And I'm hopeful that the arrival of the new member for Surrey South will also bring some realism to the opposition debates here and get us away from the bumper stickers and more to the solution-oriented approach. And I know that that's tough for oppositions, but I think the public would prefer to hear some solutions from the opposition rather than claiming that everything's gone to hell in a handbasket.
Rob Shaw, Check News.
If you could say it again if you want. You just did. You mentioned a couple times trying to show the public progress on files. And I just wondered if do you feel like you have the room to make decisions right now to show progress on healthcare and prolific offenders when there's another leader who's going to step into your job in the weeks ahead? And do you feel constrained in any way on the things you might be able to do? Or the money you might be able to spend, or the decisions you might be able to make without sort of handcuffing the next person in the job to your policies?
Well, when I advised my cabinet that I was going to step down, I advised all of you at that time that I had every intention of focusing on doing the job until I wasn't doing it anymore. And I've had no pushback from anyone within government about that. My team continues to set directions. Cabinet met this morning. We went through a range of issues. I'm going to represent the province in an international forum later today, and I'll be back Friday to continue that work on a range of other issues. So I don't feel constrained at all. I made it clear that we had a mandate granted to us by the people of BC 2 years ago, and we're going to fulfill that. The mandate letters are active until they're changed. And so I've had no, and the system, I have to say, again, having spent some 30 years in and around this place, inside the system, outside the system, elected in executive council, that the professional public service has done extraordinary things in the past 5 years, as all British Columbians have. I don't want to single out in that way. We've gone through a global pandemic, a toxic drug supply, natural catastrophes that we couldn't have imagined in the past, and we stood up programs that had never happened here before. Over weekends in some cases, which is not normally how government works. So I think the system has been very responsive to the expectation of the public that because we have instantaneous communication, I see colleagues looking at their telephones, I'm sure you're not playing Scrabble like I would be doing, but you're doing things, you're interacting, and you're moving issues forward. The system has been doing that as well, and I don't believe anyone has been constrained by the notion of change, other than when that happens, we've got binders prepared that will be reviewed, and if there are changes to happen, that'll happen after I'm gone. But as of today, and throughout the next number of weeks, I fully intend to keep on moving the ball forward, which is what I intended to do when I was first elected.
Follow-up?
What do you make of the Liberal strategy in the first two question periods here, where your ministers have stood up and said, you know, we're doing this, we're doing that, there's more money for Crown prosecutors, we're working on HR for healthcare, and they turned around and said, show us the results. Show us the real world results where things seem to be getting worse. And then there's sort of this disconnect, I think, between the public on you increase the Crown prosecution budget, but random crime is up and people are scared. Yeah. You've increased the healthcare recruiting, but people are dying in emergency rooms waiting for care. That disconnect, what do you make of that?
Well, then I understand how the public would go, well, why are they saying this? And this is my lived experience. This is what I'm seeing in my community. And I get that. And the job of government, and I would argue, without putting too much pressure on all of you, the job is to explain these things, not just to and I'm easy for me to say, but taking the catch and release issue that Les referenced. You all know that that's nonsense, but yet that's become part and parcel of the way we discuss this very important issue. Rather than burrowing down to the mental health issues, burrowing down to the challenges of past practice, and that's why you bring in experts to, look at these things with new eyes. And again, why there's a need for renewal in all of our institutions, in elected offices, in media, across the board. We need to make sure we're constantly looking at these things anew. And instead of just accepting a slogan, we should dig a little bit deeper. One example this week was there were more police than protesters here on the opening day. And what I heard was, you're not doing good enough on X or Y. And someone that it was a disembodied voice, but it sounded like someone who did not have a lot of life experience, talking about things that have been going on in BC for 150 years that won't be turned around in a nanosecond. So again, I don't want to piss any of you guys off because you still buy ink by the ton. So I'll just leave it at that. But the disconnect is a result of everybody, not just governments, not just oppositions, but everybody. The conversations at the hockey rink. If you got an opportunity, I would say to those watching, if you got an opportunity to correct someone who you think is wrong or to engage in a discussion about the complexities of life, I think you'll have more heads nods at the end of the day and a bit of despondency that things aren't better. But the best way to make things better is to step up and participate, get involved. And I hope people will do that.
Last question today, Dirk Meisner, CP.
Thanks, Bruno. Right at the very top, you said you're going to California tomorrow. You also did say you can't say much about it, but can you at least, or can you say what you're hoping to achieve, what could be discussed there, and what you would like to see discussed?
Well, we've been working, the province of British Columbia, not just this government, but going back a number of years, have been working with our West Coast neighbors, the Pacific Coast Collaborative, on a range of economic, social, and environmental issues. Most recently, the focus has been on climate change and the consequences to our jurisdictions. When we look to the fire seasons and the drought, devastating droughts in California, the impacts of those issues all the way up the coast, acidification of the oceans and the impact on salmon. Salmon are not just an iconic BC species, they're iconic to Californians as well as Oregonians and Washingtonians. So what we're going to do is what we've been doing for some time is finding ways to collaborate on these issues. The Nooksack River, for example, is one of those cross-border issues that requires Washington and British Columbia to work together. But there's a whole range of issues that involve the three states as well as British Columbia. And whenever we can build relationships at the political level, supported by the infrastructure, in my case, the Intergovernmental Relations Secretariat, as well as the Climate Action Group and Economic Innovation, I'll be going to the Silicon Valley to talk about recruiting more tech companies and more tech workers back to BC. So it's an opportunity to do all of those things, but the focus is going to be on climate and the challenges that all four jurisdictions are facing. We had a conference earlier in September that laid the groundwork for the signing we're going to do in San Francisco.
Follow up, Dirk?
Sure. A couple of weeks ago, the seniors advocate came out with a report, and her conclusions were that British Columbia ranks at the bottom in Canada for supports, for financial supports for seniors in BC. I'm just wondering what your response to that is.
Well, I have a great deal of respect for Ms. McKenzie and the work that she does. I did not dive deeply into the report, Dirk, so I can't give you an informed answer on that question, but I do know that we have been increasing supports for seniors since we came to government significantly, the SAFER grants and others. We've reduced costs. I don't know if she quantified seniors paying MSP premiums. They don't do that anymore. A range of other initiatives to reduce costs for people. Obviously, seniors aren't looking at their child care savings, but there's been significant child care savings as well. As grandparents, perhaps they're seeing some advantages there, more free time for themselves. But I do know that there's always more work to do. I think that's the only way to really answer your question, is that we take advice from representatives like the seniors representative. And again, Ms. McKenzie did extraordinary work on long-term care facilities. And when you look across the country through COVID, because of the work that she had done to prepare the new government, our government, to start that work, when COVID hit, we were in a much better position than Quebec, for example, where Mr. Legault, despite good outcomes at the end of the pandemic, had some big challenges, particularly in long-term care, as did Minister Ford in Ontario. So because of the work of Ms. McKenzie to highlight the shortcomings of the former government, we were able to start making progress. But that means there's still more work to do, and I welcome her inputs at all times. I apologize, I haven't read the report.
That's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us.
Okay.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.